This meeting is being recorded.
John.
This meeting is being recorded.
Good afternoon, folks. This is Paul Gilje, and I'm delighted today to introduce you to the family of Chris and Karina Gilje, who were immigrants to southern Minnesota back in about 1912. They had moved to Iowa first. I'll leave the details to their descendants here in a couple seconds. But happy sitting to mind to all of you. This is a very real special opportunity to have the Gilje family from southeastern Minnesota to be featured. I can tell you, I had no idea of the existence of this family until I was a student at St. Olaf back in 1955, and I was going to a rural church for some kind of a meeting, and they asked me if I knew the Gilje family of this area, and I said, gee, I don't think I do. That was my first acquaintance. And I've known Dale Sommers for almost half a century as it is, and he's a grandson of the couple, so we know quite a bit about him. And technically, just for your information, Chris Gilje, his grandfather, shows up as a fourth cousin of mine when we do the genealogy. So Ron Sommers and Dale Sommers, grandsons of Chris and Karina, are going to make the presentation. So go to it, fellows.
I'm Dale Sommers, and my brother Ron is here with me. Paul asked us to share something about the family of our grandparents, Kristian and Karina Gilje. To allow time for comments and questions at the end, I'll be moving quickly, more quickly than anyone can absorb, but I'm going to try to jump right into the PowerPoint. So, like I said, I'm going to try to jump right into the PowerPoint. And again,
click play. See play at the top, it's a little black triangle.
Yeah, but the screen sharing itself has to engage.
It's sharing.
Yeah.
Oh, you've got the screen?
Yes.
Okay, so let me go to, okay. I guess I'm not seeing what you're seeing. So let me go straight to full screen here. And now I've got it up. Okay, so when Kristian landed at Ellis Island, his first name began with a K, but by the time of his marriage 3 years later, it had been Americanized to begin with a CH. I'll switch back and forth between saying Kristian and Christ, though it may not sound right to Norwegian ears. He was commonly known as Christ, even on the farm deed. I will also switch without thinking between Gilje, the most common American pronunciation, and Gilje, a more Norwegian pronunciation. Once again, the technology. The photo on the left is their wedding photo from 1906 in Osage, Iowa. I remember them as they look in the photo in the upper right from the mid-1950s. The lower right is the farmstead where they spent most of their lives in section 15 of Warsaw Township, about 5 miles northeast of Denison. Kristian and Karina had 17 grandchildren. Several of them are gone. 9 of them, marked with a star, spent part of their childhoods living on the farm with their grandparents. At the end, Ron will say a bit more about Thelma's 4 children, Lyle, Clarice, David, and Arlene. When Chris and Karina's only son, Bertel Selmer, or Sam, died, his wife Faye and daughter Cindy lived with them for a bit. And in Karina's last years, youngest daughter, Belle, and Elmer's family, including Ken, Chris, Karine, and Kim, all lived on the farm. Those cousins all knew our grandparents far better than we did. Our memories are sketchy. Several family members from different branches of the family have been told about this Zoom presentation. I want to thank those who contributed photos, and some may be online and will perhaps have comments to add when we finish. The big book on the bottom left includes the Gilje family. The one on the bottom right includes the Espedal family. The gray covered book in the upper left is the Gilje family history book, Paul Gilje, published in 1990, focused on the descendants of Kristian Gilje's parents. The yellow book in the upper right was published in 2005 by Arne Gilje, then living in Malmö, Sweden. It goes back 2 more generations. I have 2 other sources I want to note. From time to time, I'll mention something as told by Norman. That would be Norman Nelson, my mother's cousin, the son of Karina's sister, Sarah. Norman was born in 1928, 4 years before Kristian and Karina's youngest child. In the 1980s, and again a couple decades later, I wrote to Norman asking for some information about family history. His wife Irene jotted down notes as he reminisced and sent the notes to me. Norman died in 2005. And from time to time, I'll mention something as told by Jeanette. That would be my cousin Jeanette Nelson Minton, the daughter of Kristian and Karina's second daughter, Geneva. I'm lucky to have a copy of a school term paper about family history written by Jeanette in 1957 at a time time she could ask questions directly of Kristian and Karina. That's a treasure. Jeanette died in 2020. This story will start near Stavanger in the upper left corner of this map. It's long been an important port in one of Norway's largest cities. In the lower right corner of the map in the Dyrdal Valley is the small community of Gilje, where Kristian Gilje was born in 1883. It's about 20 miles as the crow flies from Stavanger, but much farther by road. North from Gilje, about 8 miles as the crow flies, is Øvre Espedal, where Karina Espedal was born 5 years later. Those places are 2 valleys apart. Even now, there is no connecting road. Kristian and Karina never met in Norway. Their story ends in Denison, Minnesota, after a decade in Fonda, Iowa. But first, Kristian emigrated to the United States in 1903 to join a friend who worked on a farm outside Norris Springs, Iowa. Karina emigrated a bit over a year later in 1904 to join her brother who worked on a farm outside Osage. It's more than 20 miles between Osage and Norris Springs, much farther than the distance between Gilje and Øvre Espedal. As told by Jeanette, Kristian and Karina, quote, met in the Norwegian Lutheran church they both attended. That was the rural Reich Creek Norwegian Lutheran Church, located between Osage and Norris Springs. Born 5 years apart, 8 miles apart, Kristian and Karina first met in a new country 4,000 miles away. What are the odds? I'm going to leave Kristian and Karina for a minute and ask that same question about my wife, Kathy, and me. I'll start by adding some sites in North Dakota to the map. My wife, Kathy's mother, Tamina, came to the United States as a young woman in 1928. She joined her sister Marie, who had come earlier and was working on a farm near Max Bass, North Dakota. There, Tamina met a handsome young Dane who she married. Her sister Marie married Ole Helland, and they spent their lives farming in the area around Minot. Tamina and Axel made a home and raised their family just north of Bemidji, Minnesota. Tamina's maiden name was Stenskog. As it happened, Kathy's mother was born in the Dyrdal Valley, the same valley my grandfather, Kristian, had come from. My family had lost contact with our Norwegian relatives after my grandparents died. When Kathy and I made our first visit to the Dyrdal Valley in the 1980s, it was with one of Kathy's first cousins who lived near Stavanger. A couple years later, when we made our next visit, word spread ahead of us. We were simply told by Kathy's cousin from Stavanger that one of my relatives in the valley wanted to meet us. We were directed to the home of Dagfinn Gilje. There, we were greeted by a packed house full of people, most of whom we had never met, all related to one of us or to both of us. One of my mother's elderly cousins showed me a photo album that included photos of my childhood that my mother had sent decades earlier. Magnus Nudland was sitting in an easy chair in the corner. He waved us over, pulled out a piece of paper, and briefly traced both of our genealogies. Everyone has 32 great-great-great-grandparents. Few people know who any of them are. Magnus discovered that Kathy and I share one great-great-great-grandparent, Eric Aslakson Hanna, born in 1769 and married twice. Magnus found that Kathy and I are fourth half cousins. I'm not going to take time to help you make sense of this chart, but I'd be happy to share it with anyone who wants to see it.
That's a great chart, Dale. We'll be able to watch it when we watch the recording. So thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you. Max Pass, North Dakota, the first stop in America for Kathy's mother, Tamina, is nearly 600 miles from Norris Springs, Iowa, the first stop for my grandfather, Kristian, 25 years earlier. Bemidji, where Kathy grew up, is about 250 miles from Northfield, where I grew up. Somehow we, two descendants of the Dirdall Valley, ended up together. What are the odds?
And by the way, Norris Springs is right where my great aunt or great uncle lived as well. So they knew the folks in Norris Springs. Go ahead.
Sure. Getting back to Kristian and Karina, because they are the focus of the overall presentation, to keep them in context and family charts like the one on the bottom of this page, I will include a small red star near their names, even when I'm talking about their siblings. As I mentioned, this Gilje family was the subject of Paul's 1990 history, so I won't go into much detail here. Kristian was born March 16th, 1883, to Bertel and Anna Toletta Gilje. He was the 9th of 10 children. Kristian was the first member of the family to emigrate in 1903, with his 20th birthday occurring on the voyage. There is one untold story. Johanna, the youngest in the family, shown as a young girl in the photo, left to join her brother Kristian in Norris Springs 3 years after he emigrated. She arrived at Ellis Island on March 29th, 1906, the day before her 20th birthday. Sadly, 15 days later, she died of pneumonia in Iowa. In researching this presentation, I discovered that Johanna's unmarked grave is in the family plot of the Tastenrud family at Rock Creek Norwegian Lutheran Church in Iowa. Last July, there was a Zoom presentation on Moritz Gilje and his wife, Kristi Tastenrud Gilje. Moritz immigrated to Norris Springs in 1883, the year Kristian was born. They were third cousins, but there was enough of a family connection to allow young Johanna to be buried in the family plot of Moritz Gilje's in-laws.
Superb work, Dale. Superb work.
The story of Andreas, another of the brothers, will be covered next month. But of this Gilje family of 10 children, most of Kristian's siblings remained in Norway. On the other hand, all of Karina's siblings tried life in the United States. There's no reference book on Karina's family, the Espedals, like the one Paul wrote on the Giljes, so I'm going to spend a bit more time on them. Karina was born March 3rd, 1888, to Sven Nilsson Espedal and Jorina, Eric's daughter, Eikskog Espedal. We have no photographs of Sven, Jorina, or the family in Norway. Sven and Jorina, were married in 1883 and bought a farm in the Espedal Valley. They had 2 sons and 4 daughters. Then, as told by our mom's cousin Norman, Grandpa Sven was moving hay in the winter with horses and a wagon, went across a lake, and they fell through the ice. Grandpa got pneumonia and died 27th of December, 1892. Sven was 37 years old. Jorina was 32. Their children ranged from 6 months to 9 years. Our grandmother was 4. As told by Guttorm Mikkelsen, a genealogist from Norway, Sven had bought a farm a few years before for about 2,000 kroner. That was a lot of money at that time, and by far the most of it he had borrowed, among others, from his brother, who was a tailor in Stavanger. And after Sven's departure, Those who had loaned the money wanted to get it back from his widow, and Urena was left with 6 children not provided for, and she had to leave the farm and went on relief. Guttorm Mikkelsen sent me a blurred photocopy of a letter from his archives, which I had translated. It had been found in a book in Espedal. It was written by our great-grandmother, Urena, to the local sheriff in 1896, 4 years after her husband died. By this time, the 2 oldest girls, ages 12 and 11, had been sent to other families to work. The remaining 2 boys and 2 girls were from 4 years to 9 years old. This is the gist of that letter. Urena wrote that Forson's Poor Relief Commission got her a room at a local farm the previous year. Then there was a change at the commission's leadership. When Urena's landlord requested payment for the room as well as for some food I had received from him, the new spokesman for the Poor Relief Commission instructed the landlord that he should throw me out of the house. The landlord tells me that he got these orders several times. Farther out during the winter of '96, the landlord started one early morning. First took our table and threw it out. After that, he takes a bed and puts it out in the kitchen. Then he takes a bench used in front of a settee and throws it out under the open sky along with the before-mentioned table. After that, he takes my little son, Eric, 4 years old, and throws him on the floor. We cried, all of us, 5 in number. This took place one winter day in rain and slush. The landlord was told that when night came, he should lock the door and keep us outside. Apparently, he did not follow this order, but put us up in a cold, small room while our table and bench used in front of the settee were left standing outside for a long time. After that, there was a meeting at the Poor Relief Commission to which I was called in. From reliable sources, it became known to me that they had in mind to lock me in at the site of the meeting and then to walk over to the place we were staying to pick up my children and put them outside. I did not attend the meeting. 5 members of the Poor Relief Commission appeared at the house where we were staying the next day and gave instructions that the door had to be locked. The children were then clinging to me out there in the snow. I stood there with my youngest boy in my lap. The spokesman then comes and shakes me so that I fall in the snow with my 4-year-old boy in my lap. Then the inspector for the poor relief of this area takes me and actually carries me into the house, where I, together with my children, was allowed to stay for a while. Now I have a house to stay in with another member of the community, where I have been since Easter. For a while this summer, we actually went hungry. I made a complaint and my situation got to be better then. Now some of the poor relief commissioners are having me go hungry again, in that they are helping me with my 3 children with 2 kroner per week. This should be for food, for clothing, for firewood, to pay the rent. Signed at Rogaland, October 10, 1896, Urena E. Espedal. It's a sobering story. As told by Jeanette, in the end, all but 2 of the children were placed with other families where they could work for a living. According to Norman, they were treated well. Within 14 years of that letter, all 6 of the Espedal siblings, 4 of them in their teens, would leave for America. All would spend time in Fonda, Iowa, where Karina and Kristian settled and started their family. There were ships that sailed to America directly from Stavanger, but the Espedals, like many Norwegians, sailed first to Britain and then on to the United States. In 1901, Nils, the eldest son, was the first to leave for America. The ship manifest said he was age 20, but he was actually 15. He traveled to Osage, Iowa with 2 other Espedals who were listed as ages 19 and 21. He found farm work. In 1904, 3 years after Nils emigrated, Ellen, age 20, and Karina, age 16, joined him in Osage. In 1909, the 2 youngest in the family, Sarah and Eric, joined the family in Fonda, Iowa. Sarah was 19, Eric 17 at the time. According to Norman, the eldest Espedal daughter, Martha, was the last to leave Norway. She was 27, had a good job as a midwife in a hospital. She arrived in America in 1910 after her sister Karina's 3rd child was born. Incidentally, pardon? Incidentally, Martha sailed to America on the Lusitania, a ship made famous 5 years later in the early days of World War I, when it was sunk by a German submarine and nearly 1,200 people died. Martha went back to Norway once, but returned to the USA. Less than a decade after arriving in the United States, the youngest sibling, Eric Espedal, enlisted in the U.S. Army in February of 1918, and by May sailed for Europe. He served as a private in Company B, 130th Machine Gun Battalion, 35th Division, and was part of the massive Meuse-Argonne offensive that led to the armistice ending World War I in November of 1918. It was more than 5 months later when he returned to the United States. Back in Iowa, in Norman's words, Eric worked for a farmer. One day the farmer gave him hell. So at noon, Eric picked up his clothes and went and got on his horse and rode off to North Dakota. He went to Underwood, North Dakota, where he married Esther, a widow with a child, Florence, who later married a Johnson. Eric farmed and worked driving truck in a mine. As told by Norman, the eldest son, Nils, worked hard and played hard. He was married very briefly to a woman who Norman simply described as something else. They had no children. Nils returned to Norway, then back to Fonda, Iowa, and then finally back to Norway before World War II. According to Guttorm Mikkelsen, when Nils returned to Norway, he got himself a little farm in Lyngdal, about 100 miles southeast of Stavanger. There he lived in one room he had fixed up in the hay barn. Norman recalled hearing that German soldiers came to the farm, but they didn't hurt Nils. Ellen Espedal married Lars Smil. They had no children. They moved to North Dakota for a bit, but then returned to Norway before World War II. According to Guttorm Mikkelsen, when Ellen and Lars Smil returned to Norway, they farmed near Rosendal, about 100 miles north of Stavanger. That's where the Espedal children's mother, Irina, spent her last years and is buried. Norman recalled that the mail wasn't going during the war, but after the war, someone wrote to Martha, telling her that her mother, Irina, had died. Irina would have been in her 80s, about 50 years after her husband, Sven, fell through the ice and later died of pneumonia. Sarah Espedal married a Swede, Arvid Hjalmar Nelson, in 1927. The next year, at the age of 37, she died of pneumonia after childbirth. It's Sarah's son, Norman Nelson, I've been quoting. Martha Espedal, the youngest Espedal sibling, the oldest Espedal sibling, never married, eventually had her own house in town, but helped raise Norman and was a housekeeper for her sister's husband and son for 28 years. In Norman's words, after Sarah's death, his father, Hjalmar, quote, had a hard time. He didn't know what to do and with his son to take care of. But Martha set him straight. They moved off of that farm and onto another one. Decades later, in 1962, after time in the Navy, 2 years of college at Ames, Iowa, and farming on a rented farm with his dad, Norman bought a farm near Spring Valley, Minnesota. He moved there with Hjalmar, and in 1969, he married. Hjalmar lived with Norman and Irene and their family until his death in 1979. Norman died in 2005, but we still hear from his wife, Irene. Martha, who was the last to emigrate because she had a good job in Norway, died in Fonda, Iowa in 1976 at the age of 93, the eldest and the last of the Espedal siblings. Like Sarah and Hjalmar, she is buried in Cedar Township Cemetery near Fonda. Going back in time, in Gilje, as told by our cousin Jeanette, Chris worked for his brother Axel for several years, but he was unsatisfied. America was beckoning him. In 1903, he left Norway. He came to Norris Springs, Iowa, where the friend with whom he was traveling had a brother, and here obtained farm work. On March 23, 1903, the Cunard Line's SS Etruria arrived in New York from Liverpool, and the ship manifest included 5 young men with the surname Gilje. The manifest showed 2 Kristian Giljes, both age 19, though our grandfather had his 20th birthday on the voyage. Both Christians had a destination of joining Thomas Gilje in Norris Springs, Iowa. I don't know anything about the second Kristian Gilje or about Thomas Gilje. The other three Giljes on the ship, Bertel, Ole, and Tor, all listed their destination as Rolette, North Dakota. Tor is mentioned in Paul's 1986 genealogy book. A little more than a year later, Karina Espedal arrived in the United States on July 8, 1904, on the White Star Line's SS Baltic. It was the maiden voyage of what was then the world's largest passenger ship. I think it was interesting to note that it was captained by Edward Smith, who would 8 years later captain the tragic maiden voyage of the Titanic. The ship's manifest listed Karina's age as 16 years, 4 months, traveling with her sister Ellen, age 20. They were going to join their brother Nils in Osage, Iowa. As our cousin Arlene told the story in Paul's 1990 Gilje family history, Karina, quote, had not planned to come, but only went to the ship to see her sister off. While saying goodbye, her uncle stood watching. He said, "Karina, would you like to go too?" She replied, "Yes, but I have no money." He said, "I'll pay your way if you wish to go." She was delighted and jumped at this opportunity, not even saying goodbye to her mother or the rest of the family. As told by cousin Jeanette, Karina and Ellen got work at the farm where their brother worked. Their pay was $1.50 a week plus room and board. At some point, Kristian and Karina met in rural Rock Creek Norwegian Lutheran Church. They both attended. In the spring of 1906, Kristian's sister Johanna briefly joined him but died. Later that year, on October 31st, 1906, Krist and Karina were married at the parsonage in Osage, Iowa. As told by cousin Jeanette, Krist searched the newspapers in hopes of finding a better job. A tile factory was being opened in Fonda, Iowa. So after their marriage, they moved to Fonda, where he got a job in the tile factory. This lasted only 6 months until they moved to the farm of the factory owner, where Krist was paid $35 a month to run the farm. As I mentioned, all of the Espedal siblings spent time in Fonda. We have no photo of Nils. I believe the photo on the left showing our grandmother Karina with her 3 sisters was taken about 1911 or 1912. I believe it shows Martha holding Thelma on the left, then Ellen holding Borghild, my mother, Karina in the center, an unidentified woman, and then Sarah holding Geneva on the right. The photo on the right is a couple decades later, showing Eric Espedal holding Norman Nelson. I believe this photo is from 1912 or early 1913. In 1914, Krist and Karina's only son, Bertel Selmer, or Sam as he was known, was born in Iowa. In 1920, Myrtle was born in Minnesota. That was 6 children in 13 years. 12 years later, Beldora was born in 1932. By that time, their oldest daughter, Thelma, had started a family of her own. Jeanette wrote, the Giljes weren't completely satisfied in Fonda, though. They wanted a Norwegian Lutheran church where their children could go to Sunday school. According to Wikipedia, Norwegians established their first settlements in Minnesota, in the southeast part of the state. Decades before the Giljes moved from Iowa, there was already a growing Norwegian presence in Goodhue County. Jeanette wrote, in 1916, they moved to Denison, Minnesota, and bought a 120-acre farm near the Wangan Prairie Lutheran Church. Kristian was about to turn 33 and Karina was about to turn 28 with 5 children, when on March 1st, they bought 120 acres in Section 15 of Warsaw Township for $13,000. That's about $108 per acre. Both Krist and Karina are on a mortgage deed to the seller for $9,500. On this map, perhaps 1921, you can see the location of the Gilje farmstead. You can see the location of Wangan Prairie Norwegian Lutheran Church. Goodhue County had 169 mostly small rural school districts, and High Prairie School was less than a mile from the Gilje farm. To the southwest was Denison with a population of about 200. Just a bit farther to the northeast, far off this map, was Cannon Falls with a population of about 1,300. Some roads have changed. since that map was drawn. Nothing remains of High Prairie School, the former Gilje farmstead with an address of 3190 County Road 24 Boulevard, and Wangan Prairie Lutheran Church are both now on paved County Road 24 between Wangs and Cannon Falls. The photo on the left is the way I remember the farm from the 1950s. The photo on the right is from 2025. The barn is gone. The lilac bushes have been replaced by a two-car garage. The house has been remodeled and then remodeled again. For 51 years, from 1916 until Karina's death in 1967, that remained the Gilje farmstead. Then the tillable acres were divided between two neighboring landowners. The young couple who bought the house on 10 acres in 1969 has now lived there for 56 years. We don't know much about the move from Iowa in 1916, except Kristian moved up first, coming in a boxcar with his cows, and Karina and the 5 children came later. The Chicago Great Western Rail Line came up from Iowa to St. Paul with stops in Denison and Stanton. According to a website about trains in early Goodhue County, in between there was also a stop on the Fagan farm in Warsaw Township. The tracks are gone, but there's a historical marker at the site. It's fun to note that the so-called milkshake train picked up cans of milk and cream at stations along the railroad line, carrying the filled cans to the Twin Cities in the morning, returning the empty cans to the stations in the late afternoon. A church with a Norwegian Sunday school was central to the move to Minnesota. The church school at Wangan Prairie, built in 1879, with that date shown near the door, still stands, unlocked to visitors, complete with blackboards, desks, pot-bellied stove. We always take Norwegian visitors there. School records were kept in Norwegian until 1927, 48 years after the school was built. The pictured record is from 1920. You can see that our mother, Borghild Gilje, age 9, scored 91 in Bible history, while older sisters Thelma and Geneva each scored 95. The school stands next to the church, built in 1901, still standing and, like the school, always unlocked. Much of the family's life focused around the church. Kristian served as a trustee and Karina served as president of the Wangan Prairie Ladies' Aid. In the church basement, there's a display of old confirmation pictures. In the photo on the right, our mother, Borghild Gilje, is shown in the front row, far left, as part of the 1924 class. Photos from the 1960s with my cousins in them are part of the same display. The church basement was the site of Kristian and Karina's 50th wedding anniversary celebration in 1956. Our mother wrapped a tree branch in gold foil and attached 50 gold foil wrapped silver dollars. The photo on the right includes 6 of their 7 children. A year later, the church was the site of the funeral of Krist and Karina's only son, Bertel Selmer Gilje, commonly known as Sam. His stone is shown in the upper left above the one of his wife Faye and of their daughter Cynthia. The stone of the youngest daughter, Beldora, is in the upper right above the one for her husband Elmer. The gravestones for Kristian and Karina are shown at the bottom. I mentioned High Prairie School, less than a mile from the Gilje farm. The photo in the lower right from the class of 1932 to 33 includes Myrtle Gilje in the back row. There were no school buses to bring children from the farm to high school in Cannon Falls. As told by Jeanette, when they finished 8th grade, the 2 oldest girls had to go to work to help support the rest of the family. They went to Northfield, a dozen miles to the west. They both did housework, and Thelma also sewed at Francine's apparel shop. Our mother, Borgie, the 3rd child, became the first to attend high school. She was able to share the room her sister Thelma rented in Northfield. At one point, the 2 of them were quarantined for scarlet fever. The 4th sister, Karen, left high school in her first year due to illness. She went to work doing laundry at the Laura Baker School for children with special needs. The day after high school graduation, Borgie went to work for the people Thelma worked for. Thelma was starting a family of her own. Geneva and Borgie then got work at Carleton College, Geneva as a dining room girl and Borgie as a pastry cook. After several years, Borgie switched to St. Olaf College as a pastry cook. Sam and Mert went to high school in Northfield, and Mert trained as a nurse at St. John's School of Nursing in Red Wing. According to cousin Kathleen Prehall Weaver, there were still no school buses a couple decades later when Beldora, the youngest sister, and Thelma's children, Lyle and David and Clarice, each stayed at the home of Karen and Bill Prehall while going to high school in Northfield. Buses to Cannon Falls schools became available before the last of those and Thelma's daughter Arlene were done with high school. As I said at the beginning, our cousins who lived part of their childhoods with our grandparents knew them far better than we did. For us, our grandparents' farm was a place for frequent family gatherings. There were aunts and uncles. There were cousins, the children of older cousins, to play with. We remember the house, the yard, the buildings, the pasture with a creek running through it. Everybody's a bit dressed up in the bottom photos for a 1957 visit by Kristian's cousin Erling Gilje from Norway. Having served for decades as a missionary in China, Erling was in Minnesota for a church conference in Minneapolis. Erling was the father of Arna, who wrote the book I showed earlier. Krist died in 1962. Karina died in 1967. The last three children of Krist and Karina died in the 1990s. Of their 17 grandchildren, of their 17 grandchildren, 8 have died and 9 remain. I have a chart of 200 descendants of Kristian and Karina over 6 generations, 7 children, 17 grandchildren, 50 great-grandchildren, 77 great-great-grandchildren, 46 great-great-great-grandchildren, and 3 great-great-great-great-grandchildren. I won't list them all here. Thelma married Orrin Eglund. She died in 1989 at age 82. All 4 children, Lyle, Clarice, David, and Arlene, are gone. Ron will tell more in a few minutes. Geneva married Harold Nelson. They lived their lives in Northfield. Geneva died in 1973 at age 64. Both children, Hal and Jeanette, are gone. Borgie married Don Sommers. They raised 2 sons on a farm southeast of Northfield. Borgie died in 1995 at age 85. Ron lives on the family farm, and Dale lives in Northfield. Karen married Bill Prehall. They raised 4 children in Northfield and then followed their grown children to New York City. Karen died in 1997 at age 85, the last of the Gilje siblings. Kathleen and Susan live in New York. Peter in Northfield. Patty is gone. Bertel Selmer Gilje, or Sam, married Fay Craig. Sam died in 1957 at age 43. Their one daughter, Cindy, is gone. Mert married Kenneth Washburn, always known as Dutch. They had no children. They lived in Gurnee, Illinois. Mert worked as a nurse and died in 1993 at age 73. Beldora married Elmer Jensen. They lived in rural Goodhue County. Belle died in 1972 at age 39. Ken, Chris, and Corinne all live in southeastern Minnesota. Kim lives in Chester, Iowa. Ron is going to share one more family story, and then we'll open up for questions and comments.
Thank you, Dale. I hope I have most of the facts right in this story. It's basically from my memory with some visiting with some cousins. Following is what I remember about what I consider an important segment of our family story. It's a story of love, kindness, dedication, commitment, and sacrifice. Kristian and Karina's eldest daughter, Thelma, in the late 1920s, married Orrin Eglund, whose family farmed in the area. In the next few years, Lyle, Clarice, David, and Arlene were born, and Orrin's work took the young family to New York City. Their move from a rural area to a large city hundreds of miles from home was a huge cultural adjustment at the time, when staying in touch with their family's support system back home was even harder than it is today. It was 1937 when Thelma became ill and began having difficulty taking care of their young children. Kristian and Karina, back in Minnesota, learned of the situation and offered to have the children stay with them for a time. The significant distance and poor roads of the day complicated making arrangements. Thelma was hospitalized. At the time, Thelma's sister, Borgie, was dating her future husband, Don. Don and Borgie's families came up with a plan to bring the children to Minnesota. While the lingering effects of the Great Depression were still strong, a friend of Don's brother, who operated a service station, had a car that was new enough that it was thought capable of making the trip to New York. Because Don and Borgie were not yet married, the family thought it wasn't appropriate for them to take a long trip together. So Donald's brother, Harold, and Harold's buddy, along with Borgie, took the borrowed two-door coupe with a small back seat and drove straight through to New York to get the children. They were in their 20s, but it was a long and brutal trip, decades before the interstate highway system. The roads of the 1930s were far from what they are today. They told of encountering their first roundabout, the first one they'd ever seen, and drove around it at least twice before exiting toward the Holland Tunnel under the Hudson River into Manhattan and onto Brooklyn. I think they stayed at least 2 nights in New York to recover from their grueling trip. Finally, for the trip home, they put Lyle, Clarice, and David in the small back seat. The 2 men traded off driving, with Borgie sitting between them on a split front seat, holding baby Arlene for the straight-through drive back to the Gilje farm in Minnesota. There's a picture of Borgie changing Arlene's diaper in a grassy road ditch somewhere between Brooklyn and Minnesota. The 4 Eglin kids were welcomed by Kristian, Karina, and Beldora. Beldora, the Gilje's 7th child, was born 12 plus years after the youngest of her siblings. Her age was in the middle of her nieces and nephews from New York. Time passed, and the kids became like brothers and sisters. The Eglin kids thought of their grandparents as Ma and Pa. A few years later, Thelma was still hospitalized. Orrin visited the Gilje farm with the intent of taking his children back to New York with him. The car door was opened for the children to get into the back seat. Lyle led and the others followed into the back seat and out the door on the other side of the car. The message was that they liked being together with their grandparents on the Gilje farm. Orrin returned to New York without the children. Orrin died in 1946 when his children were between 10 and 17 years old. The children continued to live on the Gilje farm, and their mother, Thelma, remained hospitalized in New York. Chris and Karina's offer to take care of the Eglin kids became a commitment to raise them to adulthood. They had a virtual family of 11 children, with their youngest Eglin granddaughter born when Kristian and Karina were about 53 and 48 years old, respectively. Kristian and Karina were heroes in so many ways. Their offer to take care of the Eglin kids for a while became a lifelong commitment with trials and rewards. They were not wealthy in dollars or physical comfort. Their lives were filled with hard work and caring. They milked their few cows by hand, carried drinking water from an outside well house, and didn't install indoor plumbing until they were in their late 60s. But their lives were filled with love, commitment, and compassion. Their daughter remained in a hospital or care center for the remainder of her life. She was eventually transferred to a nursing home in Pine Island, Minnesota, so her children could see her periodically. In 1995, at Borgie's funeral, the story was told by the pastor, including Borgie's trip to New York to bring her 4 nieces and nephews to Minnesota, along with the long drive home and changing diapers in the grassy road ditch. During a time for sharing memories, a nearly 60-year-old Arlene stood and said, "I was that baby whose diaper was changed in the road ditch." In 1967, at Karina's funeral, the original 4 Eglin kids and Beldora and their spouses decided they would start a tradition of periodic, often multi-day family reunions. They alternate between homes in Illinois, Minnesota, and Washington, and include extended family members. The original 5 are gone now, but their children and grandchildren have continued the reunion tradition to assure that the next generation know and remember each other and the value of their family heritage.
That's it, folks. If any cousins want to chime in, speak up. Otherwise, we're open to questions, and I'm going to stop sharing the screen now.
Let me
So-
offer a first comment. This is probably the most accurate, well-done presentation I have ever seen in my life. And I congratulate Dale and Ron for the hard work they did, for the research they went through, for the incredible good stories that they put in here, including the one about the poverty in Norway and the generous Chris and Karina taking care of their grandchildren. Just such a superb job. And thank you, the two of you. And I think the rest of us are all going to believe that as well. And we'll be anxious to share this throughout the family history group as soon as this is recorded, and we'll send it around. So yes, go on to questions right now.
I want to give Dale credit for doing most of the research, and mine was largely from memory of the Eglin family, and I could share many other stories too, but Dale is the one that really put this together, so my compliments to him.
And one more thanks to all the cousins who contributed photos and a couple of conversations that helped fill in some blank spots. Go ahead.
One question, Dale, which I've addressed to you in the past, is the connections, if any, between the relatives in southeastern Minnesota and the relatives around Rolette, where so much interest has been presented in our thing. I understand there was virtually nothing, but is that true?
I have no knowledge of connections between the two branches of the family. It's, it's interesting that same ship manifest showed family members going both to Norris Spring and to Rolette. And, two family members, two of the Espedals, which, are by marriage connected, made their way to North Dakota. But I have no knowledge of any direct connection between our family here in Southeast Minnesota and the one in North Dakota.
We are pretty confident that there was a real strong connection between the Norris Springs Giljes in our family and your family. That was implicit in Tostenrud. Kristi Tostenrud, of course, married the brother of my grandmother, Moritz. So had to have been close connection in Norris Springs. The other thing is that Tor, the one of the four that were on the ship, Tor's granddaughter, we will be staying with her in Norway when we take our trip this summer, and that granddaughter's husband is the vicar at the cathedral in Stavanger. So there's some interesting connections there. So Tor homesteaded right at the corner. For those of you who know the corner, right at the corner across the road from Lars Gilje in Rolette. That's where Tor homesteaded. But he went back to Norway early, so he did not stay in America.
Ron mentioned the continuing family reunions held by the Eglin kids and the Jensens, and including, the extended family as well. I'd also like to mention that Christine, who was in Norway, I believe, a year ago, is organizing a family trip for a number of her a number of members of that family to Norway in this coming year as well. So not only do they have regular reunions here in the States, but there are a number of them who will be traveling together to Norway in the summer. Is Christine here? Does she have anything to say about?
I was just going to comment on that. Yes, I had such a wonderful time in Norway last year and came home and told my cousins about it. And of course, the family that we met when we were over there, totally by accident. I didn't really have any contacts, and ended up the first person that I met was married to my cousin. And she is the granddaughter of Axel Gilje. So he was Christian's brother. So our grandparents, our grandfathers were brothers, great grandparents. Anyhow, they just kept saying, you have to come back, you have to come back. And I said, if I come back, I'm going to have to bring some of my cousins with me because they have to see this wonderful place. So I came home and I sent out an email to everybody and said, hey, anybody who wants to go, I'm going to put together a trip. And so 13 of us are going in September. And we just so happen, the timing of it was not intentional, but we are going to be there the same time that Paul and a group of his family are going to be there. And so we plan to connect while we're in the Durdle Valley, at the very least, have dinner together, if not breakfast a couple of times. So I'm looking forward to that.
We are very much looking for that. Looking forward to that, Chris. Thank you very much for making that testimony. That's great.
Sure.
Could I say
John,
something?
do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I'm at my son's college. We're moving him out literally right now. I'm taking a break to attend this a wonderful meeting. In describing the history of the Giljes, you are making history right now with this amazing presentation. This will forever be referenced and studied. And I just want to thank you for that, all the effort you put into this thing. What I've been doing is, because of technology, I've been trying to flesh out the lives of the people who I know in my family by adding things to Ancestry.com. For example, marriage certificates, my daughter's graduation ticket to her high school. All these documents could be uploaded to Ancestry, and also stories about things our family has done in their lives. For example, my Aunt Kathleen, who is Karen Gilje's daughter, who is very much alive in Brooklyn, New York. I found out only recently that she, in the late 60s, she was very upset that African Americans were discriminated against, and they weren't allowed to rent from apartments where white people were. So I just wrote on my blog, I'm going to share it with all of you. You can read it when you want to, that my aunt was involved in fair housing program where she would pose as a prospective renter with my cousin David, her son, and they would rent the apartment to her, and then a Black family they would not rent to. And my aunt volunteered herself to do that. So these kind of stories really flesh out, not just the birth and the deaths and the marriages dates and all that, but we could add more to the whole story by these talking about and adding them to sites such as Ancestry.com. And I'm going to share it. Okay, you can read it when you have time. All right. But thank you. I'm finished.
Thank you.
Josh, I just want to say it's nice to meet you. Kathleen was actually, my dad stayed with her when he was going to high school, and she named her son David after my father, David Eglin. So,
Wow.
yeah.
Amazing. Yeah, I talk to her regularly. She's only about a 15-20 minute drive from my house.
I've talked to her on the
She
phone.
she lost her husband several years ago.
Yeah.
So we've been trying to he was her everything. So
Yeah.
we're trying to fill in the gaps with her life and making it more fulfilling. And I just shared that blog I wrote about what she did in the late 60s.
That's awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Really cool.
Yeah, I've got a question. Kind of, I think it's interesting that in Norway, you're named after the farmstead that you were born on, and which means that there's a lot of, like Carolyn's grandfather. Well, his name changed from Gilje to Moen, but it's interesting that there's so many people that have the same last in America, have the same last name, but yet are not even related at all.
Well, that's true. But just to be clear too on that point, Joe, the Gilje families that we are featuring have still, one can go back to the Gilje Valley, and most of the people that we're talking about here all came from that same Gilje Valley and were second cousins or whatever you might say. For example, Chris was the second cousin of my grandfather. So there was always a good connection there.
Yeah, some of them I don't know about. I'm curious about Knut though, because who was that other Gilje that moved into Halliday that he wasn't related to?
Oh yeah, Chris Gilje, yes.
Yeah, and he wasn't related to him, but yet basically the same
Dale,
last name.
let me look at a question of you about Chris. Is it possible that the Chris Gilje from Halliday was one of those people on that boat that day?
There's nothing to say that it's impossible. I found he was headed originally for Nora Springs. The two of them went to Nora Springs, but I found no record of the second Chris Gilje after that initial arrival. So it is conceivable that it's another, that he established another family elsewhere.
This is a little hole. There's all kinds of holes in family history. You can fill them all. This hole could be filled well because one of the descendants of that was a school superintendent in North Dakota. Is still around. There's all kinds of people there. And Joe, I know we could find some of those people. Maybe even some of them. Or Carolyn, you might know some. Do you know any of the folks of the descendants of Christ? The one from Halliday?
Not off the top of my head. I'd have to do some research.
Okay, thank you.
But wasn't Chris' wife related to?
Chris' wife.
She of Crawford?
Yeah. Close,
right.
Yeah, so they were related that way.
That's right.
By marriage.
Hey,
Yeah,
Paul.
so marriage.
Hey, Paul. I had a comment.
Yeah,
This is Bernie. Yeah. Well, one thing that you notice in these different presentations when we're giving names of great grandparents and so forth is how you hear names that you don't hear anywhere else than this group, because they're old Norwegian names. And I heard one today that Dale mentioned about a relative of his that I don't think he's the first person I've ever heard speak this name that wasn't in my family. And that was the name Tomina.
Mm-hmm.
And I had a great aunt, my maternal grandfather's sister, was named Tomina Strandness. And in a related note, you mentioned how that section of southeast Minnesota was an early, prior to a lot of the North Dakota immigration from Norway, was a place where Norwegians tended to congregate when arriving in America. And my maternal grandfather, the brother of this Tomina, she probably perhaps as well, was born in Red Wing, which when I looked on my Google Maps is right in the area. I wasn't sure where Goodhue was when you first started, and I looked it up on my phone, and Red Wing is right up at the northeast corner of it, kind of. So it just kind of confirms, these what you had mentioned there.
I have to say about Tomina, she was born in the Dirdal Valley. So just this past autumn, we were in Oslo and visited, let me just say there's a great grandchild of my wife's cousin. I can't trace it would take me a while to figure it out, but there are Tominas still in the family. It's a name that's being carried on because the connection is there.
I got a picture here I just took off my wall in my office, if you can see it. This is a homestead in somewhere in probably not too far from Webster, South Dakota. And Tomina, this was her homestead that she built as a young single woman. And she's the woman, she's in dark clothing, but I think she's on the left of that picture. let's see. Yeah, on the left side but she would have been born in probably 1870s or something like that. But anyway, yeah, I guess that's the first time I've heard the name outside my family. So I thought it perked up my attention. That's it for me.
Chris Jensen, have any thoughts?
Well, I think this has been an excellent presentation.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else want to throw in some ideas or comments? Kathy, how about you? Sommers?
Okay, I had to put myself back on. I was impressed with how much work he's put into this whole family reunion thing, and he did a great job. I wasn't expecting him necessarily to put down that we were fourth cousins, half once removed or whatever it is. Yeah, my mother was Tamina. She was she had a sister, Marie, that was in Max Bass or wherever, and she went through London or not, whatever, went through England boat and then took a boat. She had a contest going with her brother, Torleif, and as to who was going to get to the United States first, because they had the one sister that was here, and she came 2 months before he did. So
Thank you.
But yeah,
Kathy, I believe you and I are third cousins, aren't we? And
yeah, I
I'm
think we are.
Dale. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah, I'm related to a lot of those Gillies.
cool. Okay. Anybody else? Bernie, or excuse me, Jeff Epping, could you have any thoughts you'd like to share?
Oh, I just like Bernie, I recognized or saw the name Bertina, who was my mother, but seeing that name in common, it's not a common name I've seen elsewhere. And then I have a brother also named Lars, so it's nice to see on the charts.
Thanks. Okay. Anybody, Frederica, any thoughts you have? Okay. Anybody else? Kurt?
Just excellent
Gilje?
job.
Go ahead, Frederica.
Terrific presentation. Really appreciate it. It's great.
Thank you. Thank you, Kurt. Good.
Good.
Any other thoughts?
Could I share an original document? I don't know if you have this one. It's Kristian Gilje's military registration card.
Dale, do you have comments on that?
Why don't you scan it to me and I will make it part of a collection of things that I'll make.
Yeah,
more
I'll send
available.
I'll send it to you. Sure, no problem.
All right. So are we near the end here, or we got some more wisdom to share?
I'm plumb out of wisdom.
Okay. Thank you all. Thank you so much, Dale and Ron particularly. You know, this is historic today, and I'm sure glad Josh mentioned that. Thank you again. Have a good sitting to bye, folks. We'll say goodbye. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.